are naturally happening, and you'll probably learn just as much from talking with each other as from listening to me drone on. But I'm excited to be here. John, did you want to say anything from the library's perspective? I don't need no welcome or anything like that. But
no, I'm just glad that people showed up. Everyone crawled out of their houses from the winter. Everyone's excited about gardening, just like everyone.
Yeah.
So thank you all for coming, and thanks, Kate, for coming and talking to us about gardening. We're always excited to learn new things every year.
Yeah, and this is a slightly different topic than I've shared before. So I see a lot of familiar faces. Raise your hand if you've done a program with me before, or maybe you just look like someone I've seen before. I don't know. I just want to do one quick housekeeping on the restrooms. If you do need to get up, are right back there. I'm sure many of you have been familiar with the space, but I never regret pointing that out. And feel free to just get up if you need to. I'm very informal, as you can probably already tell. I did want to point out that there are 4 pieces of paper that I would love for you to have. You can either grab them on the way out, but if you do want to get up and grab them, if you haven't already, there's a bigger sheet that's a handout, and that has kind of a summary of what we'll talk about today. There is a half sheet that's a feedback form that I would be very grateful at the end, if you don't mind just leaving on the table back there after the fact. Don't fill it out now, because you won't know how to fill it out. And then there's a cardstock piece of paper that has some green little dots and more information that I'll talk about in a little bit. And then lastly, my business card, which is also back there. And then I do have free seeds. So that's not to incentivize you to fill this out in a nice way, because this is anonymous feedback, but just for you to take home. I did find myself like passing out free seeds on the way up to the post office person and parents, because I wasn't sure how many people are signing up for today. And this is great. It's lovely to see such interest. I'm very interested in gardening right now too. I think we all are ready for it. So yeah, we're going to be talking about, and I'm going to try not to stand in the way of my screen here, gardening tips for small spaces. And it is hopefully going to be a mixture of a presentation, but more of a conversation between all of you. Because if I've learned nothing in my 15 years in extension already, it's that usually when I'm talking to a group of gardeners, there is a huge amount of knowledge in the room already. So you've had experience gardening. Even if you've never gardened before, you have some great questions that will help us all learn with each other. And I love, there's the Penobscot language. I learned recently that the word teaching and learning, if I remember right, and I don't know the word right off the top of my head, is the same. So I feel like it's just a beautiful part of my job is to learn with you and from you as well. On my way up here, I'm actually based in the Bangor office. I work for the University of Maine Cooperative Extension, and I support home and community and school gardeners. And I cover Penobscot and Piscataquis and Somerset and Franklin counties, so kind of like the central width of Maine. And so I'm based in the Bangor office, and on my drive here today, I was trying to think about like how I would kind of frame the introduction of this, and it got me thinking about time and how we oftentimes, when we have less time, we use it more efficiently. And I think that's very much the case with space in our garden. When we have less space in our garden, we use it more efficiently. And oftentimes you can grow the same amount of crops, the same volume of crops if you're vegetable growers, in that same small space as you would if you had twice the amount of space. You can just do it more strategically. So my goal for today is to share some tips and ideas, and hopefully get you to talk about some of your own tips and ideas and experiences with growing in smaller spaces, so that we can all kind of bump up our game a little bit in terms of yield. But I did want to, another quick housekeeping thing. This is just, I just want to point out this slide real quick. I am working with the University of Maine. I work with the University of Maine, and we are federally funded. So this is just a message from our federal funder that you have the right to participate in this program. If you have any questions or concerns, this is how to contact our federal partners in the university about your accessibility to this program. So this is just a quick overview of how I plan to break up this conversation / presentation. And I wasn't sure how big of a group that we were going to get, so we might have to do our introductions efficiently, very quickly. And this is optional. And for those of you on Zoom, I'm not sure if John's going to come back or not, but maybe you can pop your information in the Zoom too. Just your name. If you do have a garden, if you want to mention whether you're growing in raised beds or containers or in the ground or a mixture of all three. And if you have maybe one question that is really burning and that you want to have answered or try to answer while we're here today, mention that. After we do a quick round of introductions, I'll share some resources because I always find if I put the resources at the end, I never have a chance to share them with you. And then that's the most important, is to know where to look for the answers, because clearly we can't cover all the gardening information in one session. So I want you to know where to go for research-based, Maine-based information. We'll go over some practices to help you be more efficient in a small space. And then I have a feeling we might not have time for the activity, but I was an optimist when I put this together. So I put together a little activity at the end. And then again, just a reminder that I would really be grateful for your feedback. And that can just be left on the table at the end when you go grab your seats. So any questions about the overall format? Okay. Can you hear me all right? And can you see this okay? Okay, there's a little bit of a glare. I think I can adjust it if needed. Okay, so who wants to dive in and introduce themselves really quick? Okay.
Corner, I might as well start. I'm Ron Dober. I live in downtown Greenville. I have a small raised bed in Cleveland, and last year I got into container gardening fairly heavily. My burning question has to do with pests / either deer or insects.
How to get past them.
How to get past them.
Oh my gosh. That's just a teeny question, isn't it? Yeah, thanks, Ron.
It's hardly worth the effort sometimes.
It's worth it. Thank you.
Ed and Sherry Langlis from Dexter. We have both 7 raised beds and in-ground planting. The one big question that I have is how to continually fill these beds with what kind of soil.
Okay.
Our beds are on the ground. They're always depleting.
Other question I have. Do you recommend soil testing?
Great. Yes. To quickly answer, that's the easiest one I'll be. Yes, but then I could talk with you for an hour about it. So yes. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Tina, and I'm from Abbott.
Okay.
And I do all 3 or try to. I'll just wait and see what questions everybody else has.
Great. Thank you.
I've done a little bit of gardening. Always use help.
Great. Me too. Hmm. Mm-hmm. Don't blame yourself. Don't blame yourself. Yeah, no, that's good background though. I have shade exclamation point on there. So, but it's not, you can overcome that too in other ways. So, yes.
Anita Bowman and Bob, and we have an in-ground garden, but we also have raised beds. My question is, I put the cucumbers on an arch. I had trouble. They start off great, but they kind of coat towards the end, and they just have a big clump at the end, and turn into like this little
Football? Are you growing like little green footballs? Is that? Or
They're supposed to be pickling, but at the end it's like a ball, and then it just kind of goes into like a beak or something.
Yep.
What causes that, and what do I do about it?
It's either pollination or fertilization issues, and there are definitely a lot of factors there. And I'll try to get into that, but if we don't have time, we can get into the harmony. Okay, great. I'm just going to write cucumber football, so I'll know what that means, because that happens a lot. We get that question a lot.
I'm gonna follow up.
Okay. What she said, right? Thank you, Bob.
My question is, how bad can you damage soil a rototiller?
Oh man, and I'm being recorded here. Yes. I'll write recreational rototiller, possibly, question mark. Okay. It's like many things in life. Everything's in moderation, right? Just do it in moderation, but we can talk about that in a minute. Mm-hmm.
People leaves on.
Yep. Yes. I think mostly helping. Yeah. Sounds good. Yeah. That's great. Good background. Thank you, Bob. Who do we have beside Bob? That would be Judith. Yep. That's big.
I do a lot of costly material and I just don't get it. There's something wrong with my body. Lots of
I really regret not bringing soil test kits with me, but I suspect just down the road, because we do have an extension office, I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, right almost across the street from here, we'll have it. So I'm going to go over there right after this, and hopefully we can get you some.
So we can buy them there?
You can pick them up there, and then when you send in your sample, you actually pay. So you can grab what you need and then send it in with a check. And we can talk about that. Yeah. We'll go on either end here.
Sherry,
Okay.
well,
Sherry.
My husband and I used to have gardens. Excuse me. We used to go to the farmers market, Portland farmers market. Never. Now, I've got to go to
Oh my gosh.
large greenhouses. I just want to it to 5 acres.
This is why I have introductions, because I never assume. You can't assume.
So the home that we bought has existing gardens and it's so anxiously
Mm-hmm.
to see what hold that is a plastic
Mm-hmm.
cover display. But I want to get ahead. And I want to get ahead.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Constant flowering.
Mm-hmm.
Something.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure. That just. Cold. I don't know. Yes, do it for me.
All of the above, I think. Yes. Mm.
leaned over. I thought a garden out on the side,
Mm-hmm.
and it was overgrown. I have bookmarks taken over. When I walk around, I see all kinds of different herbs. I know there's a lot more herbs I don't even recognize. Onions, but I don't. It's everywhere, nowhere. I'm
Mm-hmm.
just trying to figure out how to utilize this space.
Okay.
And probably rototilling
Mm-hmm.
it.
Mm-hmm.
But the deer love it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's part of the picture, a real part of the picture. Thank you. Yes. Good point. Oh, it's so tempting to just answer these one at a time, but then we would be here for 4 days. But yeah, thank you. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Claire. Yeah, great question. And I was waiting for that term to come up because it comes up every time. So it was like the last person mentions it. So great. Well, and so we're here and through tomorrow afternoon, right? Because I'm like looking at this going, oh my gosh. But we are here until, to be truthful, until noon, right? You guys have until noon because I'm gotta keep an eye on the time. I'm not just checking texts or anything, but I want to make sure I'm not going over. So a lot of the questions that you have can be tied back to the basics. So when I developed this presentation, I developed it in like this tighter framework of thinking about helping people grow in small spaces such as container gardens and raised beds. And I know a lot of you have larger spaces to work with. But this big part of our production is related to the environmental conditions that we give our plants to grow in. And so it would be remiss if I didn't talk about some of these key things that are very common sense to most gardeners. And I'm sure you can all relate to how important site selection is. And so talking about sunlight, it depends on what your goals are. How many of you are, your main goal is growing vegetables and food? Okay. And then flowers, any of you that are primarily growing flowers or even partially your goal is growing flowers? Okay, so a mix. So in general, and I'm going to have to just stick to generalities for right now, is most of your vegetable crops that you're producing for fruit. And when I say fruit, I mean anything that's producing a seed inside. So cucumbers are considered fruit, tomatoes are considered fruit, beans are considered fruit, our winter squash, our summer squash, any of those are considered fruit. Those generally need about 8 hours of sunlight to really thrive. They will survive unless it's not black or white, as you know, as all gardeners, that you can grow these things. And I've been guilty of it myself. I lived in a little log cabin for about 20 years with very little light. And I would grow container gardens on the rooftop, the porch rooftop, with my tomatoes. And even then, it was like really questionable whether it was 6 to 8 hours of sunlight in the hemlock grove that we had. But I really wanted to make it happen. It wasn't an efficient use of my time, but it was a labor of love. But really, if you're limited in sunlight, like our friend with the pine grove, it's not something that you can really change very quickly. And I wouldn't recommend necessarily removing a lot of trees. It's just rethinking about what your goals can be. Maybe it's that you shift towards supporting your leafy green habits, or you're growing specific herbs, those things that don't necessarily require as much sunlight, and just embracing that and going into the season with those expectations can be a real game changer, and then help it be more rewarding for you. Or leaning into some of those more ornamentals just to give you joy of, some of those shade. There's so many great shade loving ornamentals out there that are great to add to the landscape too. Soil moisture is key. As I'm sure you know, it was either all or nothing last year at the beginning of the season. We were rainy, and then all of a sudden someone turned off the switch. And that was really impactful in our overall yield in all of our gardens, especially if you didn't do any supplemental irrigation. So knowing how well drained your soil is a really important starting point when you're choosing what to grow. If you have a vegetable garden, especially in ground, that is poorly drained, that can definitely impact your yield. And so taking steps like adding organic matter, like the leaves that you add every season, or the aged cow manure, compost every season, will help build that porosity and that soil moisture movement capacity for soil to move through the soil. But also, if you have the other end of the spectrum, does anybody have sandier soils up here? I kind of think that's probably not the trend up in this neck of the woods, but put it out there. Sometimes there's pockets here and there. But if you're on the sandier end of the spectrum, that adding organic matter can actually help with the moisture retention in your soil as well. So it's less of an issue with raised beds and container gardens. But I will say that container gardens, if you're growing in pots, just be sure that you're filling them with generally a bagged product or a compost-based mix, not the soil that you would be digging from from the ground around your site, because the physical properties of your mineral soil in a container garden setting will be too heavy. So those bagged products that are peat-based or compost-based are what you would want to use in that setting, because that'll help with good moisture management. In raised beds, someone asked about filling raised beds and what to use to fill raised beds, and that they were noticing their raised beds shrinking every year and that you were constantly refilling it. That's a common question that I see a lot. In general, the recipe to fill those raised beds is you want to use about 75% mineral soil, meaning like if you were to go out and shovel down into the ground right outside the door here, you're going to dig in and you're actually going to get soil that is made up of broken down pieces of rock, sand, silt, and clay. Those are the different size pieces in mineral soil. There's going to be a little bit of organic matter in that soil out there, but the majority of it is mineral soil. That is literally and figuratively the foundation that you want to have for the primary part of your raised bed. You're not going to necessarily get that when you go to the garden center and get the bagged products. Not to say those bagged products are bad. Those are also good to add to your raised bed. But when you look at any of the bagged products, I would be hard pressed to find anything that really has any mineral soil or any significant amount of mineral soil. Most of those bagged products are made up of composted organic material or peat-based materials. So if you're filling your bed with those, and especially if you're noticing them shrinking, it's because those materials are being broken down gradually over time. And they're literally turning to air. They're turning to carbon dioxide. They're just breaking down like you would in any compost situation. And so blending those in with that mineral soil in raised bed settings is the recommendation, because it'll help the porosity of your raised beds, but also you'll still have that foundation to work with.
Is loam a mineral soil?
Yes. Loam is technically this Goldilocks blend of sand, silt, and clay. And if you ever took a soil science class, there's this classic triangular diagram that shows in the middle, like in the top is sand, in one corner is silt, and one corner is clay. And the ratio of all three, like the perfect blend of all three for a vegetable garden setting, is a kind of a sandier loam, something that's a little bit of a leaning towards sandy, a little bit more well-drained, but not fully sandy. Am I making sense? I'm very visual, so if I don't have my prop to show you that diagram, I wonder.
But there are no nutrients. That's what I was told. When I buy this stuff at the garden center by the pail, they say, there's nothing nutritional.
That's a very good point. So there are nutrients that are bound to those loam particles, those soil particles, but it's not very rich and dense. You will need to supplement it with fertility. And compost itself isn't necessarily considered directly impacting nutrients and contributing nutrients necessarily to. It's very low in nutrient, actual nutrients, but what it does, and that's soil's a topic that's so huge, but it helps give nutrients, make nutrients available to plants indirectly. As it breaks down, nutrients become available. It also, more importantly, has these sites called cation exchange capacity, where it allows the binding of nutrients that are added to the soil. So with fertilizers, for example, it binds that and then makes it available to the plants as the plant roots grow past those organic amendments.
What's the difference between compost and fertilizer?
Compost is actually the organic materials, such as aged manures, and depends on the feedstock that was used to create the compost. And fertilizers are other types of amendments, either synthetic amendments that were made or amendments such as blood meal and bone meal that are added that have a higher density of fertilizers. So the products, like if you've seen blood meal and bone meal and organic dried products, typically there are liquid feed fertilizers as well. On those fertilizers, you'll see generally a 3-number ratio. They'll have NPK, and that's the amount per weight of that product of those particular nutrients. And then they'll also sometimes have other micronutrients in there as well. What soil testing would do, just to answer the quick question of would you recommend soil testing, in most cases, yes. If you're strictly growing in container gardens and filling those container gardens with a potting mix, and you're not really using mineral soil, and it's more of a short-term kind of growing situation, I would say most of the time I would not necessarily recommend a soil test. But if you're growing in raised beds or in the ground, I highly recommend soil tests. It gives you a foundational knowledge of what's happening chemically in the soil that you can't assess visually. You can assess physical characteristics of your soil, like how well it drains, how porous it might be, by looking at your soil, but you have no idea what your pH level is. You don't know what certain nutrient levels are without actually going and submitting it to a lab to test it. Or in some cases, there are some off-the-shelf soil test kits that you can get. I would say the reliability of those is significantly lower than if you were to send it into the lab. The lab has very expensive equipment that has reliable results, and they have fine-tuned their testing to our main soils too. So, and it's, for the amount that you would pay for a kit versus actually getting the soil test done is, I haven't shopped for them recently, but I think it's like a few dollars difference. So. Good question. So I'll repeat it for those. How often do you test your soil? And that is usually every 3 to 4 years, unless you're seeing issues. And you're curious, like, okay, the leaves are looking a little yellow, or that might be due to other factors too. But in general, 3 to 4 years, because your soil is living. You're growing different things in your garden. You have different microorganisms that are active below the soil line. So, and one really important piece, and it's just like any like medical testing that you're doing, if you're submitting a sample, the results are only as good as the sample that you've submitted to. So that's the other question, especially that can be tricky to answer for those of you that are working with raised beds, especially if those raised beds have been added gradually over different times and you've been filling them with different source materials. That if you want it to be accurate, I would say test them separately if they've been filled with different sources of loam, for example, or you've been growing different crops consistently in them. So we can have more of a conversation, and I can ask you a bazillion questions to find out like whether it might be more appropriate to do a separate test. And in some cases, it might make sense to test bed A on this year, test bed B next year, and then like gradually do it, and then just get into a rotation where you're testing one bed a year. And then the most important piece, who can tell me what the most important piece is after soil testing? What was it? Following the recommendations. Yes, it seems so common sense, but many of us sometimes forget to do that, or write down what we did. Did we actually follow those recommendations and take good notes as to like, okay, they recommended this many pounds of bone meal per 1,000 square feet. Now you're not working in 1,000 square feet, but we can help you calculate that down to whatever square footage you're doing and then figure out the recipe. And then write it down on the back of the soil test report that you get. Because the nice thing about getting the report from the lab is that I don't work for the lab. I'm like the educational partners. I'm not trying to sell you anything. But they give you the so what. They don't just tell you your phosphorus is low. What do? If you get that information, they tell you this is what you need to add. The other piece, you mentioned lime. I think it was you that mentioned lime. They give you information about your relative acidity, your soil acidity, and whether you need to add anything like lime or wood ash to make your soil more alkaline, or if you need to decrease the pH and make it more acidic. And in some cases, it can be beneficial to have it a little bit more acidic. And that can be a game changer. That's like a really big game changer is the pH levels, because that can actually impact the availability of your nutrients. So you might have the nutrients there in your soil, but they would be tied up chemically if your pH is too high or too low. So I spent probably a little too much time on that, but it's such an important piece of the puzzle. And I'm happy to talk with you more about like your specific scenarios too. But
one more question.
Yeah.
Would you recommend adding loam to containers to the potting mix?
No. Yeah, that's a good question. So I don't know if you all heard that, but would you add loam to a container mix? It would kind of help you stretch your dollar probably a little bit, but it would negatively impact the physical characteristics of it, and also might introduce pathogens that might, a little bit less likely, but might introduce pathogens.
I did that last year and I didn't get great results.
Yeah, I would. And it's okay to reuse your container garden. I reuse potting mix all the time, unless you have your plants have had a disease that year. I would say it's great to keep using it and just kind of top it off every season, because it is going to shrink down from year to year. So you are going to need to top, but it's expensive. And a quick hack for raised beds or container gardens too is you don't necessarily always have to fill it all the way with those bought materials too. So if I have a big whiskey barrel, for example, and I'm just planting it with some ornamentals or even vegetables, I oftentimes use fillers in the bottom of that, like old soda bottles with the caps on, or usually I have nursery pots. So I have these that I'm taking my plants out of. I stack them up so they're staggered onto one another, just as like a filler in that space. It helps with drainage, and it helps you save a few dollars on that bagged potting mix. I will say that you have less of a space for those roots to grow, less of a sponge for to hold the water, so it will dry out faster, and you may not have as much growth. So you want to kind of dial it in to whatever you want to do, but yeah. That's great. So just to repeat that, I'm sorry, what was your name? Judy. Judy used the logs and sticks as fillers for the bottom of the raised beds, and then put your loam in and your organic matter in. So that's a great idea as well. Definitely, I see a lot of people doing that because that's a lot of depth and a lot of work to put in there. What I like most about this particular picture, this is my colleague Binia's house, and she's got such a dreamy garden. And so I like that this is very accessible. She's pulling in, she's parking, her gardens are right there. Access to water, access to your daily routine is so important when we're talking about our gardens, because the more likely you're going to be more likely to catch pest and disease issues early. You're going to hopefully, sometimes it's not always the case, but you'll have less of pressure from mammal predation if it's closer to your house. I hesitate and stutter around that one because as soon as I say that, someone's going to say, "Oh yeah, the deer come right up to my back door," and that's the reality in Maine. But having it be easy to water, we all think that we're going to be able to get out and water as regularly as we want to, but water is a huge factor in the productivity of our garden. And so if you're not out there watering as much as you should, your yields will definitely be impacted. And so if you can locate things as close to that water spigot, or implement things like putting a Y breaker on your hose spigot so that you always have a hose running to your garden versus hooking it up each time. Those little things we think we'll be able to do every time will just make it that much smoother when you have a little bit less time to do things. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of great ideas out online too about that. The kind of similar where you're doing these like kind of trickle irrigation systems, but DIY. It's great. So, and we already talked about soil health.